Chapter 11 of Across the Years. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Ina Dabisher. Across the Years by Eleanor H. Porter. Chapter 11 for Jimmy. Uncle Zeke's pipe had gone out. Sure sign that Uncle Zeke's mind was not at rest. For 5 minutes the old man had occupied in frowning silence the other of my veranda rocking chairs. As I expected, however, I had not long to wait. "I met old Sam Hadley and his wife in the cemetery just now," he observed. "Yes." I was careful to express just enough and not too much interest. One had to be circumspect with Uncle Zeke. I was thinkin'." Uncle Zeke paused, shifted his position, and began again. This time I had the whole story. "I was thinkin'. I don't say that Jimmy did right, and I don't say that Jimmy did wrong. Maybe you can tell. 'Twas like this. In a way we all claimed Jimmy Hadley. As a little feller, he was one of them big-eyed, curly-haired chaps that gets inside your heart no matter how tough 'tis. And we was really fond of him, too. So fond of him that we didn't do nothin' but jine in when his pa and ma talked as if he was the only boy that ever was born, or ever would be. And we must have been purty daft to stood that, us bein' fathers ourselves. Well, as was natural, perhaps, the Hadleys jest lived for Jimmy. They'd lost 3, and he was all there was left. They wasn't very well to do, but nothin' was too grand for Jimmy. And when the boy begun ter draw them little pictures of his all over the shed and the barn door, they was plumb crazy. There wa'n't no doubt of it. Jimmy was goin' ter be famous, they said. He was goin' to be one of them painter fellows and make big money. And Jimmy did work, even then. He stood well in his studies and worked outside, earnin' money so's he could take drawin' lessons when he got bigger. And by he did get bigger, and he did take lessons down ter the Junction twice a week. There wa'n't no livin' with Miss Hadley then, she was that proud. And when he brought home his first picture, they say she never went ter bed at all that night, but jest sat gloatin' over it till the sun came in and made her kerosene lamp look as silly as she did when she saw 'twas mornin'. There was one thing that plagued her, though. 'Twa'n't painted, that picture. Jimmy called it a black and white, and said 'twa'n't paintin' that he wanted ter do but 'lustratin' fer books and magazines, She felt hurt and all put out at first, but Jimmy told her 'twas all right and that there was big money in it. So she's got round contented again. She couldn't help it, anyhow, with Jimmy. He was that lovin' and nice with her. He was the kind that always bringin' footstools and shawls and makin' folks comfortable. Everybody loved Jimmy. Even the cats and dogs rubbed up against him and wagged their tails at sight of him. And the kids, goodness! Jimmy couldn't cross the streets without a dozen kids makin' a grand rush for him. Well, time went on, and Jimmy grew tall and good-lookin'. Then came the girl, and she was a girl, too. 'Course, Jimmy, bein' as how he had all the frostin' there was goin' on everything so fur, carried out the same idea in girls, and picked out the purtiest one he could find, rich old Townsend's daughter, Bessie. To the Hadleys this seemed all right. Jimmy was merely gettin' the best as usual. But the rest of us, includin' old man Townsend, begun ter sit up and take notice. The old man was mad clean through. He had other plans for Bessie, and he said so purty plain. But it seems there didn't any of us, only Jimmy, maybe, take the girl herself into consideration. For a time she was a little skittish, and led Jimmy a purty chase with her dancin' nearer and nearer and then flyin' off out of reach. But at last she came out fair and square for Jimmy, and they was as lively a pair of lovers as you'd wish ter see. It looked, too, as if she'd even wheedle the old man round to her side of thinkin'. The next thing we knew, Jimmy had gone ter New York. He was ter study, and at the same time pick up what work he could, to turn an honest penny. The Hadleys said we liked that in him. He was goin' ter make somethin' of himself, so's he'd be worthy of Bessie Townsend and any other girl. But 'twas hard on the Hadleys. Jimmy's lesson cost a lot, and so did just livin' there in New York. An' 'course Jimmy couldn't pay for it all, though I guess he worked nights and Sundays ter piece out. Back home here the Hadleys scrimped and scrimped till they didn't have half enough ter eat, and hardly enough ter cover their nakedness. But they didn't mind. 'Twas for Jimmy. He wrote often and told how he was workin', and the girl got letters too. At least, Miss Hadley said she did. And once in a while he'd tell of some pictures he'd finished, or what the teacher said. But by and by the letters didn't come so often. Sam told me about it at first, and he said it plagued his wife a lot. She said she thought maybe Jimmy was gettin' discouraged, 'specially as he didn't seem ter say much of anything about his work now. Sam owned up that the letters wa'n't so free talkin', and that worried him. He was afraid the boy was keepin' back somethin'. He asked me, kind of sheepish-like, if I s'posed such a thing could be as that Jimmy had gone wrong somehow. He knew cities was awful wicked and temptin', he said. I laughed him out of that notion quick, and I was honest in it, too. I'd have as soon suspected myself of goin' ter the bad as Jimmy, and I told him so. Things didn't look right, though. The letters got skurser and skurser, and I began ter think myself maybe something was up. Then come the newspaper. It was me that took it over to the Hadleys. It was a little notice in my weekly, and I spied it way down in the corner just as I thought I had the paper all read. 'Twan't so much, but to us 'twas a powerful lot. Just a little notice that they was glad ter see that the first prize had gone ter the talented young illustrator, James Hadley, and that he deserved it, and they wished him luck. The Hadleys were purty pleased, you'd better believe. They hadn't seen it, 'course, as they wa'n't wastin' no money on weeklies them days. Sam sat right down and wrote, and so did Miss Hadley, right out of the fullness of their hearts. Miss Hadley give me her letter to read. She was that proud and excited, and 'twas a good letter, all brimmin' over with love and pride and joy in his success. I could see just how Jimmy'd color up and choke when he read it, 'specially where she owned up how she'd been gettin' purty near discouraged 'cause they didn't hear much from him, and how she'd rather die than have her Jimmy fail. Well, they sent off the letters, and by come the answer. It was kind of shy and stiff-like, and I think it sort of disappointed them, but they tried ter throw it off and say that Jimmy was so modest he didn't like ter take praise. 'Course the whole town was interested, and proud, too, ter think he belonged ter us, and we couldn't hear half enough about him. But as time went on we got worried. Things didn't look right. The Hadleys were still scrimpin', still sendin' money when they could, and they owned up that Jimmy's letter wa'n't real satisfyin', and that they didn't come often, though they always told how hard he was workin'. What was queerer still, every now and then I'd see his name in my weekly. I looked for it, I'll own. I run across it once in the personals, and after that I hunted the paper all through every week. He went ter parties and theaters, and seemed ter be one of a gay crowd that was always havin' good times. I didn't say nothin' to the Hadleys all about this, 'course, but it bothered me lots. What with all these fine doin's, and his not sendin' any money home, it looked as if the old folks didn't count much now, and that his head had got turned sure. As time passed, things got worse and worse. Sam lost 2 cows, and Miss Hadley grew thinner and whiter, and finally got down sick in her bed. Then I wrote. I told Jimmy purty plain how things was and what I thought of him. I told him that there wouldn't be any more money comin' from this direction, and I meant ter see that there wa'n't, too. And I hinted that if that 'ere prize brought him anythin' but honor, I should think 'twould be a mighty good plan ter share it with the folks that helped him ter win it. It was a sharp letter, and when it was gone I felt most sorry I'd sent it. And when the answer come, I was sorry. Jimmy was all broke up, and he showed it. He begged me ter tell him jest how his ma was, and if they needed anythin', ter get it and call on him. He said he wished the prize had brought him lots of money, but it hadn't. He enclosed $25, however, and said he should write the folks not ter send him any more money, as he was goin' ter send it ter them now instead. Of course, I took the letter and the money right over ter Sam, and after they'd got over frettin' 'cause I'd written at all, they took the money, and I could see it made them look 10 years younger. After that, you couldn't come near either of them that you didn't hear how good Jimmy was and how he was sendin' home money every week. Well, it wa'n't 4 months before I had to write Jimmy again. Sam asked me to this time. Miss Hadley was sick again, and Sam was worried. He thought Jimmy oughter come, but he didn't like ter say so himself. He wondered if I wouldn't drop him a hint. So I wrote, and Jimmy wrote right away that he'd come. We was all of a twitter, 'course. Then the whole town. He'd got another prize, so the paper said, and there was a paragraph praisin' up some pictures of his in the magazine. He was our Jimmy, and we was proud of him. Yet we couldn't help wonderin' how he'd act. We wa'n't used ter celebrities, not near to. Well, he came. He was taller and thinner than when he went away, and there was a tired look in his eyes that went straight ter my heart. Most the whole town was out ter meet him, and that seemed ter bother him. He was cordial enough in a way, but he seemed ter try ter avoid folks, and he asked me right off ter get him out of it. I could see he wa'n't hankerin' ter be made a lion of, so we got away soon's we could and went ter his home. You should have seen Miss Hadley's eyes when she saw him, tall and straight in the doorway. And Sam cried like a baby. He was so proud of that boy. As for Jimmy, his eyes just shone, and the tired look was all gone from them when he strode across the room and dropped on his knees at his mother's bedside with a kind of choking cry. I come away then and left them. We was kind of divided about Jimmy after that. We liked him, most all of us, but we didn't like his ways. He was too standoffish and queer, and we was all mad at the way he treated the girl. 'Twas given out that the engagement was broken, but we didn't believe 'twas her done it, 'cause up ter the last minute she'd been runnin' down ter the house with posies and goodies. Then he came, and she stopped. He didn't go there neither, and so far as we knew, they hadn't seen each other once. The whole town was put out. We didn't relish seein' her thrown off like an old glove, just 'cause he was somebody out in the world now and could have his pick of girls with city airs and furbelows. But we couldn't do nothin', 'cause he was good ter his folks, and no mistake, and we did like that. Miss Hadley got better in a couple of weeks, and he begun ter talk of goin' back. We wanted ter give him a banquet and speeches and a serenade, but he wouldn't hear a word of it. He wouldn't let us tell him how pleased we was at his success, either. The one thing he wouldn't talk about was his work, and some got most mad. He was so modest. He hardly ever left the house except for long walks, and it was on one of them that the accident happened. It was in the road right in front of the field where I was plowing, so I saw it all. Bessie Townsend, on her little gray mare, came tearin' down the Townsend Hill like mad. Jimmy had stopped ter speak ter me at the fence, but the next minute he was off like a shot up the road. He ran and made a flyin' leap, and I saw the mare rear and plunge. Then beast and man came down together, and I saw Bessie slide to the ground, landin' on her feet. When I got there, Bessie Townsend was sittin' on the ground with Jimmy's head in her arm, which I thought uncommon good of her, seein' the mortification he'd caused her. But when I saw the look in her eyes and in his as he opened them and gazed up at her, I reckoned There might be more to that love story than most folks knew. What he said to her then, I don't know. But ter me he said just 4 words: "Don't tell the folks." And I didn't rightly understand just then what he meant, for surely an accident like that couldn't be kept unbeknownst. The next minute he fell back unconscious. It was a bad business all around, and from the very first there wa'n't no hope. In a week 'twas over, and we laid poor Jimmy away. 2 days later, after the funeral, Sam come ter me with a letter. It was addressed ter Jimmy, and the old man couldn't bring himself ter open it. He wanted, too, that I should go on to New York and get Jimmy's things, and after I had opened the letter I said right off that I'd go. I was mad over that letter. It was a bill for a suit of clothes, and it asked him pretty sharp-like ter pay it. I had some trouble in New York findin' Jimmy's boardin' place. There had been a fire the night before, and his landlady had had ter move. But at last I found her and asked anxiously for Jimmy's things, and if his pictures had been hurt. Jimmy's landlady was fat and greasy and foreign-lookin', and she didn't seem ter understand what I was talkin' about till I repeated a bit sharply, "Yes, his pictures. I've come fer 'em." Then she shook her head. "Mr. Hadley did not have any pictures." "But he must have had 'em," says I. "For them papers and magazines he worked for, he made 'em." She shook her head again, then she gave a queer hitch to her shoulders and a little flourish with her hands. "Oh, the pictures! He did do them once, a little months ago." "But the price," says I. "The price ter Jimmy Hadley." Then she laughed as if she suddenly understood. "Oh, but it is a grand mistake you are makin'," she cried in her silly, outlandish way of talkin'. "There is a Mr. James Hadley, and he does make pictures, beautiful pictures. But it is not this one. This Mr. Hadley did try long ago, but he failed to succeed, so my son said, and he had to cease. For long time he has worked for me, for the grocer, for any one who would pay, till a little while ago. Then he left, in the new clothes he had bought. He went away. The old ones burned. He had nothing else." She said once more, but I didn't even listen. I was back with Jimmy by the roadside, and his "Don't tell the folks" was ringing in my ears. I understood it then, the whole thing from the beginnin', and I felt dazed and shocked, as if some one had struck me a blow in the face. I wa'n't brought up ter think lyin' and deceivin' was right. I got up by and by and left the house. I paid poor Jimmy's bill for clothes, the clothes that I knew he wore when he stood tall and straight in the doorway to meet his mother's adorin' eyes. Then I went home. I told Sam that Jimmy's things got burned up in the fire, which was the truth. I stopped there. Then I went to see the girl, and right there I got the surprise of my life. She knew. He had told her the whole thing long before he come home, and insisted on giving her up. Just what he meant ter do in the end, and how he meant ter do it, she didn't know. And she said with a great sob in her voice that she didn't believe he knew either. All he did know, apparently, was that he didn't mean his ma should find out and grieve over it, how he had failed. But whatever he was going ter do, it was taken quite out of his hands at the last. As for Bessie, now, it seems as if she can't do enough for Sam and Miss Hadley. She's that good ter 'em, and they set the world by her. She's got a sad, proud look to her eyes, but Jimmy's secret is safe. As I said, I saw old Sam and his wife in the cemetery tonight. They stopped me as usual and told me all over again what a good boy Jimmy was, and how smart he was, and what a lot he'd made of himself in the little time he'd lived. The Hadleys are old and feeble and broken, and it's their one comfort, Jimmy's success. Uncle Zeke paused and drew a long breath. Then he eyed me almost defiantly. "I ain't sayin' that Jimmy did right, of course, but I ain't sayin' that Jimmy did wrong," he finished. Chapter 12